Welcome back, everybody. Today is day 11 of Foundations of Programming. We're going to continue with classes and objects. Last week, the last assignment we worked on was the line segment.py. And today, we're going to continue with the last assignment with this official lesson, specifically for class and objects, which is going to be the streaming guide.py. So if you could do me a favor, go ahead and open up your directory for the Foundations of Programming curriculum. Navigate to lesson 8 and open up the streaming guide. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. And we'll talk briefly on what the assignment is expecting from you. Everybody should be looking at my VS Code. It looks like a lot, but honestly, the half of the README is just like an example of how it should be done. But you're going to essentially mimic a streaming service, very similar to stuff like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, or stuff like that, right? You're gonna write a class, multiple classes. One will be movie, which will have its individual data attributes, as well as some methods, which you can see here: get title, get genre, get director, get year. You're gonna write a separate class, which will be the streaming service, which will have data attributes like name and catalog, and have some different methods like add movie, delete movie, right? Therefore, replicating the service of like Netflix, whether they want to add a new movie to their catalog or remove one from their catalog. That's a streaming service. And then we have stuff like streaming guide, which will be a separate class, right? Where you can add a streaming service, right? Think of it kind of like cable. If you remember, if for those of you who had like Dish Network or DirecTV, you can buy different packages and stuff, different streaming services or whatever. Kind of same thing like that, or on your computer, right? Or on your TV when you have these different applications of different streaming services, which one you want to add to your TV. Something very similar to that, right? Where you can add a streaming service or delete a streaming service, or even look for a movie to watch from the different catalogs of streaming services you have. And each streaming services will have their own individual movies. Not every single streaming service will have the same movie, right? But you should be able to do something very similar to this, where you can create movie objects where you have the name of the movie, the genre. I believe they should be the director and the year of when the movie came out. You should be able to add a streaming service or create a streaming service. Let me correct myself. You want to be able to create a streaming service, which you see here. They created Netflix. All right. They add a movie to Netflix. They created a different streaming service called Hula. Another one called Disney Plus. And notice that every time they create a new streaming service, they add movies to it. And then finally, they added the streaming service itself to the streaming guide. Right. So therefore, replicating movie streaming services and some kind of streaming guide catalog to be able to manage all these different things. And each one of these classes will have their own individual methods, some more functionality than others. Do you have any questions on what is expected from you guys, or how to start, or what the README is saying? All right, time is 5:42. We're gonna take until 6:30. Once 6:30 comes along, I want you guys to go on a 10-minute break, and then we will reconvene at 6:40. If I have no further questions, let's go ahead and break off into our groups, and I'll see you guys then. All right, so how was the assignment? Did most of you guys, or you guys ever finish it off?
I finished like probably 80% of it. Wasn't terribly hard because obviously I had missed the class on Thursday, so I did some studying this weekend, and so it came a bit easier to me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Tim?
I just started streaming guide. The other two I verified that they work, but I was just starting the streaming guide portion.
Okay, and Tim?
I am stuck on the last function on streaming guide, where to watch. I'm getting issues when I'm trying to iterate through the objects within the catalog.
Okay. Well, all right, we're gonna go ahead and cut along to this. This will be the last assignment for the official classes and objects lesson. So we'll take about 15 minutes on this, and then we will move forward. I'm assuming here everybody went for their break between 6:30 and 6:40. Is that correct? Awesome. All right, let's get into it. We have the README here, and we go ahead and open this up on the side, and let me get the streaming guide up and going.
You're not sharing your screen yet.
I'm not. Let me go ahead and share it. Boom, share. Okay. All right, we should all be looking at my VS Code.
Yep.
And we'll take it from the top. All right, so first, well, the assignment is kind of written from start to finish, and honestly, so will be your assessment for object-oriented programming. It should be something very similar to this, where they'll tell you, hey, this is what you kind of need, and then you'll go from start to the end. They won't tell you how to do it, but they're like, hey, this is kind of the outcome of what we expect. Make it happen, you know? So like, hey, this is the movie class that you gotta make, and this movie class should be able to do this, that, and the third. And then you go and you do it. And then there'll be like the next class. Hey, this is the next class. Make sure I can do this. And then you go and do it. And then you'll test at the very end with some test cases. So following the same logic, we're gonna take this one and we're gonna start from the top, work our way down. In the first class we're gonna create, it's gonna be movie. Right. And this has 4 data members. And by the way, I have not coded this in a while, so if I have a little hiccup in here or there, it's okay. But I didn't do it during the break, so this is my first time seeing it in a while. So let's go ahead and define our init method, which will take himself. And the init method takes as arguments the title, genre, director, and year. Awesome. In that order, and assigns it to the data members. The year is an integer and the others are strings. All right, so that's good to keep in mind. So we'll say self dot underscore title is equal to title. Self dot underscore genre is equal to genre. Self dot underscore director is equal to director. And self dot underscore year is equal to year. And then I'll just note what this should be. Even say that this is supposed to be an int to ensure that we were tracking the year is an integer. All right. So once we have the init method, we need to get the get method for this movie, which is defined. And it's going to be pretty much the same thing for all of these. It's just a way to grab the private data member. So get title, get genre, get director, and get year. So we'll just go ahead and get those knocked out. So get title, self, return self dot underscore title. Get genre. And these are pretty much self-explanatory. So I won't dwell on these. And return here. All right. And I see to open up Python by accident. My terminal, post it out. There we go. Okay. So that takes care of the movie, right? Nothing crazy here. It's just being able to instantiate a movie and grab some of its information. The movie isn't doing anything crazy here. So we can move on to the next class. Let me go ahead and collapse the movie for now. And let's go ahead and define our streaming service, which is going to be class.
Okay, can I ask something real quick? Sorry.
Oh,
On
sure.
the on the get year, do you have to change the self dot year to an integer? So return int, parentheses self dot year.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It should be already a year. This is just
So if you classify it in the init method, you're good.
uh convert a number or string to an integer. So it looks like yes. All right. I think by classifying it here like this, it should convert it into an integer.
Okay.
But in the event it doesn't, like in my definition, I'm specifying that this should be an integer. I could do this right here if you want me to make sure it's specified even more so. So when I pass in the year and it tries to initialize it and it doesn't take in a year, this will fail. I will get an error. It'll probably be something like a value error or a syntax error, something very similar to that, where it says like, hey, year attribute year is now like divisible by 10 or something like that to specify that it wasn't able to convert it into an integer. So either one of these will work. But if you want, we can keep it like this to make sure we're tracking. We'll test it out right now in a bit to see how these work. But thank you for bringing that up. So let's go ahead and define our streaming service. Actually, let's do that. Let's try the movie out. So if you ever define a class or something and you don't want to get an error without deleting everything else, if you're not complete, just if you put pass, it'll get rid of that error. It'll just ignore it all. But let's go ahead and create a movie. Let's take this, for example, movie 1. And I can put it here. And then let's run this to see how it's working. And this would be lesson 08. TV streaming guide. And Python streaming guide.py. Okay. Yeah, I didn't get an error with this. Let's remove that. This shouldn't give me an error either. But now let's do this, where I wrap it with quotation marks. I didn't get an error. Let me see if I can print movie1.get year. I get 1956, but if I do type, let's see what it is. It gives me a class string, which is not good. All right, so as we see here that this does not convert it into an integer, but if I wrap it here when I'm assigning it, it does convert it into an integer. But what if I do 19? I get a value error. If I remove this, I don't get a value error. So this is more of define what it should be, but it won't force it. It doesn't set like a rule that, hey, this has to be integer. By doing this, we can specify in the definition like, hey, just so you're tracking, whenever you're creating a movie, the year should be an integer, right? But still good practice to be able to ensure that whenever you try to instantiate a class, what should be an integer or a float is converted to that, so you don't get some weird functionality when they try to give you something that's not an integer or a float. So you see here, by wrapping the year, or I guess typecasting the year parameter with integer, we get that issue, which is a value error. So I was somewhere in the ballpark, right? Value error. And now, even if they give me the 1957 wrapped in a string instead of just a hard integer, it'll convert it into an integer. Does that answer your question, Jason?
Yeah.
Okay, right on. Let's go ahead and remove this. We can continue with the streaming service. So we're going to define an init method. And now the streaming service, let's look at it. It has two data members, name and catalog. The catalog is a dictionary of movies with the titles as the keys in the movie of its corresponding values. But let's see how many arguments do we have to have. Okay, we only take in one argument, right? So the init method takes the name as an argument and assigns it to the name data member. The catalog data member should be initialized to an empty dictionary. So although it has two data members, it only takes two arguments, which is going to be name, or we could say service name. Whatever you want to call it to make sense for you. We'll just keep a name for now. But we'll make this name is equal to a name. And then we're supposed to have a catalog data member. So we'll say catalog. And this is going to be, has to be a dictionary, right? So the catalog is a dictionary of movies with the titles as the keys and the movie objects as the corresponding values, right? Now, when we do this, make sure you know what it should be, right? So making some kind of like notation here where you say key is uh movie title, and then you have value movie object, right? Because when you start manipulating with data members like this, like catalog, you're saving other objects as values, especially when you have multiple different attributes with different lists or dictionaries. It's gonna be very difficult to try to kind of keep track of what's saving what. So make sure you guys are making some notes here of how this should be saved or what it's holding. So when you're trying to manipulate these data attributes, you aren't confused of what how to access them, right? Now, that takes care of the init method. Next was a get method for each of the data members for get name and get catalog. Self-explanatory, so get name will return self._name. And then get catalog to do the same. Do I have any questions so far about anything I've done?
So one quick one. If you do the get catalog with that, the key, so you can see the title, and then can you like you can go into it further and get like the rest of the information from that object?
Correct. This will get by doing return self.catalog, this will return the entire dictionary, right? And then once I have the dictionary, I can kind of start nesting my way into there. So yes.
Okay.
All right. So we have the get methods. Next, we're gonna have a method named add a movie that takes a movie object as an argument and adds it to the catalog. Right. And this is a method that a streaming service should have, right? So whenever like Netflix tries to add a new movie, they should have the ability to be able to take in some kind of movie object and add it. So we'll say define add movie itself, so we know who's calling it, and it takes in a movie, and we can say something like this object, so we're aware of what it's taking. All right, so movie object. Now let's look at it. Let's see how it's gonna work. A method named add movie that takes a movie object as the argument and adds it to the catalog. So we want to add it to the catalog to this streaming service. And how should this be added? Well, we already know that the structure of this dictionary should be the key as the movie title and the value of the object itself. So we should say something like self dot underscore catalog and then open up brackets because we know this is a dictionary. And then we'll add movie. And now how do I grab the title of a movie? Well, because this is an object, we know it has some methods, right? We built these methods already for the movie object. And one of the methods it has is get title. So within this brackets where we're trying to initialize the key value pair, we can say movie dot get title. And this will call this function upon this object that we have here, which is movie. Right? Therefore, saving the title, which is a string, as the key, and then we'll pass in the entire object itself as the value. Right? Therefore, being the same structure as how we define what our catalog should be. Do I have any questions so far? Now, what we can also do is what happens if someone tries to add a movie that doesn't exist? What if this object or this argument is being passed in here is not an actual object? And this is thing that you guys have to take into account as a developer. All right, let's go ahead and try to grab this movie here. I'm going to instantiate it, and we'll talk about this. And then let's add this other streaming service here. There we go. And this streaming service has a method called add movie, which is movie one. Right, now let's do stream service one dot get catalog to see its movies. And this, all it does is a return method, but it's not printing it out. So we probably have to wrap this around a print statement. Now run this. I see that I successfully did add that movie that I had created, which is the seventh seal. We see here that the key is the title of the movie, and then we get, our hash of what's our movie supposed to be, which is the movie object. So it's working. But what if I say something like this, where I try doing add movie, and I pass in, instead of an actual movie object, I say, let's make it, the movie it. I try pass in movie two, something that's not an actual object. What's that going to do? Well, we get an error, right? And it says string object has no attribute get title. And although we get an error, right now this is a very simple method, right? But as complex as our program might get, this can become a much more complex issue than we initially see here, right? This is a very simple assignment, so we don't see anything crazy. You're not getting confused. But if you run this on these tests, it might be a little confusing if we weren't able to add a movie as we should. So the way to avoid that is you should handle issues like that by doing something like a try and accept block, where we try to add the movie, but if it doesn't, as we see here, we got an error, right? Like an attribute error. So we should probably figure out a way to handle in the event that when we try to add a movie into our catalog, it doesn't work. Now, as right now, the only thing I can think of if this doesn't work is if the object itself isn't an actual movie object. So if we can't add it, we should probably say something like print, this is not a valid movie. Now let's try it again, see how this is working. Right, we try to add movie one and movie two. Movie one succeeded, which is right here, the seventh seal. But when movie two ran, it didn't work, which is why we printed out this is not a valid movie. And then we print out our catalog, and the only one that was here was the seventh seal, right? So instead of getting a whole error that breaks our code and doesn't continue running, as we saw here, this immediately just stopped everything. It didn't even print my catalog because the moment it tried adding something to the catalog that was an object, it just stopped my program and then yelled at me saying, "Hey, this is not a movie object," right? So it's always good practice to do something very similar to this, where you want to try to do something and then handle any possible error that you might encounter to avoid your program breaking completely, right? So here, instead of my program breaking, it just didn't add it. It told me this is not a valid movie to let me know that something did not get added. And then what we can also do here is say something like adding movie here to understand what I'm trying to add. And then I can add like a colon here. There we go. And now it looks formatted. This is not a valid movie. And it prints out what the heck movie was. But here it just visually gives me an example of why it's not working and how I can possibly fix this, right? So you're not wondering like, what the heck is this telling me, right? I can read this, but some people when they first start coding, this could be a little intimidating and very confusing. So just something to keep in mind whenever you guys are coding along for the remainder of the object oriented programming section of our course, of how to avoid some of these issues that you might encounter. Try to do something and then add an alternative to what should run in the event that your try block doesn't, right? And just to reiterate, to ensure that we're all tracking what a try and accept block is, it's kind of like an if else, right? Where you're trying to run one thing, but if that doesn't work, you're going to run the else statement, right? Very similar. You're going to try to run everything within the try block, right? And the keyword here is try. the event that something breaks and does not work and you get an error, it's going to stop everything and go to the accept block. And that's very important to know, right? Because some people, they'll get like 10, 15 lines of code within the try block, and then they'll get errors. And that makes it very difficult to figure out where the issue's at, right? Where the try block will fail and then they'll get the error, but they won't exactly know what the error is because there's 15 lines of code doing different things. So whenever working with try and accept blocks, be very careful with how much you're adding within the try block to ensure you don't reach that situation where you're like, ah, okay, well, I tried doing this and it's fine. It's not stopping my program. I'm handling the error, but I don't know what the error is to fix it. So that's the only thing I wanted to bring up with the try and accept block. All right, let's go ahead and continue. I'm sorry for that detour. I feel like that was just very important to know. Something that's going to come in handy once you guys get into the immersive program that you'll probably find very useful. So we took care of the add movie method. Let's go ahead and continue. Okay, we said we had add movie. The next method that the streaming servers should have is delete a movie, right? That takes a movie title as an argument, very similar to the add movie method. And if that movie is in the catalog, it removes it. So let's go ahead and do define, delete movie. It takes self, and it takes in a movie title, right? A movie title. Whereas the add movie took in a movie object. So we'll say movie title, and this should be a string. And now let's do a try and accept block. Try. Right. Well, how do we do this? Well, we want to access our catalog utilizing the movie title. And if we get it, we should delete it. If not, we should return error, right? Well, this is a very unique situation because there's a specific way to access a dictionary and not get an error. Do you guys remember what method I used for that? Where I can access a dictionary to grab a key value pair, but in the event it's not there, I can do something else.
Is it just like an if statement?
Not exactly. Tim, I think you know. Tim.
Are you doing an if-in statement?
No. What I'm referring to is the get method on accessing stuff in the dictionary, right? So I would say if self dot underscore catalog, right? I grab the dictionary dot get, and I want to grab the movie title, right? And you recall, if I use a get method on a dictionary, if it doesn't find it, it's going to return none, right? Or I can also set something like a specific attribute where does not exist, like this. I can set a second argument where in the event it doesn't find it using the get method, it's going to return the second argument instead, right? So I'm attempting to grab the movie title, and if it finds it, it's going to return it to me. But if it doesn't find it, it's going to return does not exist. So we can say if self.catalog.get movie title does not exist is equal to does not exist, return this movie does not exist in the catalog. Something like this. Else, return movie has successfully been deleted. Now let's see how this works. We can do something like this, or we can do a try and accept block. But either or, something very similar to this. Well, we have what happens if we don't find it, but if we do find it, we want to remove it. How can we remove a key value pair from a dictionary?
Dot remove.
Yeah. I think we can also do delete self.underscore catalog. And then pass in movie title. Or I think we can also do, like you mentioned, dot remove, right? Movie title. One of these. Let's try the delete method and see how this goes. All right. I think we can do all of this here and not get an issue. Let's print out what this is saying. Probably have to do a print statement here. Movie has successfully been deleted. Okay, so that worked. Let's go ahead and run this as well. Well, instead of the 7CO, let's add this 7C. See how this works? This movie does not exist in the catalog. So it's working. It's able to try to grab if it exists or it does not. Obviously, this does not exist within the catalog, right? So when it tries to do that, it's going to return does not exist. And we're going to compare whatever comes back from this method here to this text, which if it doesn't find it, it's going to return the text does not exist, right? So this should equal and be true. Therefore, returning this movie does not exist in the catalog. Or we can probably just print this movie does not exist in the catalog. Let's just say print here instead of returning. We don't really need to return anything. And then we can remove these print statements here. And there we go. We get some better functionality. Movie has successfully been deleted for the 7th seal, but obviously this one doesn't exist. So it's going to say this movie does not exist in the catalog. Right. So this is one way of doing it here, where we are able to delete something if it does not exist. And as a matter of fact, let's just double check the catalog here to make sure it's not in here. Let me go ahead and say stream.servers.to catalog. And I want to say I have to print this one out because this is returning, not printing. And yeah, it does not exist within that method. So I'm successfully deleting this. After I delete it, I'm printing that it was deleted so I get some feedback. But in the event it doesn't exist, this is working here, right? The get method is either going to return to me the key value pair that I'm asking for, or it's going to return to me the second argument that I coded in. We compare these to ensure the same. And to be honest, this doesn't have to be this. It could be 0, right? We can make it return whatever we want. We can either return the movie itself or return to me 0 if you did not find it. And then we do the comparison. If what we get back from the get method is equal to 0, then I want to print that this movie does not exist in the catalog. Make sense, guys? All right. Let's go ahead and continue moving forward. So that took care of the delete method. Lastly, write a class R. So I think that takes care of the streaming
Hey,
service.
real quick, I guess one thing I kind of didn't like, I guess my code is a little different, we just didn't do that, was when you said get catalog and you pulled the movie, it would just pull like, an object that, essentially the object in memory, where it's like the object, the 7 seals, the title, then colon, the values are just the object with the like where it is in memory, the memory address. Um, would you normally, I guess you would normally add a string method of some kind, so you can see the rest of the objects, you
Yeah,
know.
we
Okay.
most definitely can. I just didn't for the sake of time, but we could do kind of what we talked about yesterday off camera, where we talked about the representation method here, right? Where instead we can return something like this, where we can format self dot underscore title, add a pipe, and then give it a year if we wanted to, or genre. We'll say genre. We can say self dot underscore genre. And now when we run this method, you see here that it no longer gives us that hash in the catalog. It gives us the title of the movie and the genre that it belongs to. So yes, we can do that. Does that answer your question, Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so we definitely could do that. I just didn't do it for the sake of time, but thank you for putting that up. Any other questions before we move forward? Okay, right on. So that takes care of the streaming service. Let's get to the streaming guide. Class streaming guide. All right. This should have a init method that takes no argument and initialize a data member to an empty list. Well, what data member is it referred to? Well, up above it says that has one data member, a list of streaming services. All right, let's do that. Define init. It takes a no argument. I did not do this right. But it's going to instantiate a attribute of all streaming services. So we can say list, or we can say streaming services list is equal to an empty list. Something like this. All right, whatever you want to call it to make it easier for you, it's okay. And we can do a little note here to say list of streaming services objects. All right, because these are supposed to be objects. That takes care of the init method, right? It initializes the data member to an empty list. All right. Next, we're going to define a method called add streaming service that takes a streaming service object as an argument. So we can say streaming service and let it know that this is supposed to be an object. And it adds it to the list. So something that should probably be taken into account here when I try to add the streaming service, what should it be?
I mean, you're appending an object to the list.
I am. But what should I take into account before I add this streaming service into my streaming guide?
Whether it exists already.
Yeah, whether it exists in there. I want to have like 3 Netflix, right? If I already have that service, why would I be downloading multiple Netflix apps? So we can say if streaming service, and how do we do this? How do we check if the object is in here?
.get.
Can we use .get? This is a list, not a dictionary.
Oh, you're right.
So,
Couldn't you just use if in?
yeah, we can use if in, right? So how do we check if the object itself is inside of the streaming service list?
When you do if, like the name of the streaming service in self.streaming service.
There we go. That's what I was looking for. I'm like 95% sure if I say something like if streaming service, which is an object, is in self.underscore streaming service list, it won't be able to identify it. I'm like 95% sure, right? Because there's multiple objects, but here, we'll try it out. I'm pretty sure it won't. Right, because we need to be able to find a way to see what streaming service is which. I don't think it can compare object with object. We might have to grab the name of the streaming service, right? Chase, you're unmuted. Just a heads up.
Oh, my bad.
You're good. You're good. So let's try this out. Let's create a streaming guide. And then we should be able to see if this works. When we run it, it says it's not in here. So it was able to see it's not in there. Now, I guess did it work? Well, let's add it. Let's try it out. If its streaming server is in the streaming server list, print it's in here. Else, streaming self dot underscore streaming service dot append the object. And let's run this twice. They try to add it again. Okay, it was able to work. I take that back. That's interesting. So it did work. We were able to add a streaming service. So the first time we ran it, obviously the service itself was not in the guide, right? So we see here that it's not in here, right? It's not in here, but we went through the process of adding it. We just didn't visually see it. And then I ran the same function again, or the same method. And this time, because the first time we ran it, it quote unquote added it, it gave me a different response, say it's in here. Therefore, it did not add it again. So that tells me that I was able to use the in method with a list of objects with just the object itself. I'm actually kind of surprised that that worked. I'm not gonna lie to you. But yeah, I mean, I guess it worked. I'm glad we were able to kind of experiment with it. But yeah, you guys were all on the right track. We were able to check if something existed in something, and if not, we added it. Else, we printed out it's in here. And we could change this method to say service has been successfully added. And we can change this to the service already exists in the streaming guide, or just say exists is fine. Something like this. But there we go. That takes care of that add streaming service method. Pretty straightforward. Any questions? All right. Now, what issues might you encounter with this method?
You try to add something that's not an object.
Yeah. If I try to pass in something that's not an object, it's gonna pass. It will pass. Right? Lists have different data types that you can store in them. It's not just restricted to only objects. If someone try to run this method and add a string or integer, this will succeed. It's gonna check whether it's within this list. And if it's not in there, it's gonna append it regardless. And even if I try to add it again, it will tell me that it's in there. It's gonna pass. So you might want to check whether the item you're adding is actually an object, right? With maybe a specific title name already. Like see if it has a data member specifically referring to a service name, right? So that's something to keep in mind. I'm not gonna do it for the sake of time, but I just wanted to make sure I pointed out to you guys so you're aware that this is not foolproof. You might get some issues in your code, and you as a developer need to be thinking about these things like when you're coding out, how can some goober break this code? Right? Because that's what people are gonna do. Right? Think about kind of like in the military, Joe's gonna do what Joe wants to do. Same thing. Your user's gonna do what they want to do, or something might happen, or whoever is also working with you, who's trying to continue on what you're working on, they might accidentally add something that's not specifically a service object, right? And that's something to take into account to make sure that you handle these possible scenarios that other people might encounter. Sound good? All right. Yeah, I bring this up just so you guys are aware that how you should be thinking now as you start coding along, because this is very important. It's going to save you a lot of headache in the future. So that takes care of adding the streaming service. Let's go ahead and talk about deleting one, right? So define delete streaming service. This needs self. Now let's look at it. It takes the name of a streaming service as an argument, and if it's in the list, it removes it. So this should be streaming service name, which is going to be a type string. And now we have to check if that streaming service is within our data member here of streaming services list, then we need to remove it. Well, how do we do that? Well, we can't just necessarily say if streaming service name is in streaming service because it's a list of objects. So now we probably have to loop through every single streaming service we have, grab the name of the streaming service, and see if it matches the name that we are looking for. Right? So we'll say for streaming service in self dot underscore streaming services list, if streaming service dot get name, which I believe is a function that the service has. Yes. Right. If it matches the streaming service name that we are passing as an argument, then I want to delete from the list the streaming service. How do I do this? A little rusty with deleting things. Because usually we do it by index. Anyone want to give me some quick help here? I'm pretty sure we can use remove or delete.
I used remove.
Yeah, I think remove is what it looks like.
I also use remove.
Yeah, we're gonna have to say self dot underscore streaming service list dot remove, and then we pass in the streaming service name. Else print this streaming service does not exist in our catalog. Right, something like that. Right on. And that should be it. And we could just honestly just move this to the end of it, because if it never finds it, then it should just print it out. There doesn't need to be an else statement here. All right. Now let's try that out. Let's make sure everything is good to go so far. And we get an issue here. That list.remove x not in list. Right? It tries to delete Hula, which is streaming service 2. But I see here that it was added. And then I tried to delete it and it did not delete. I know it's in there. Right? Service has been successfully added. We see that here. The second one is this.
Could you just put stream serve 2 in as that argument instead of hula? Exactly.
Could you say that again?
Like the argument hula, could you put the stream the streaming service you listed it as like stream serve 2 in where the hula is as that argument?
Yeah, I think that's probably what's happening here, right? Because what we're taking here a streaming service name. No, I mean, we're taking the name. Oh, that's probably where I'm going wrong here. No. Because the way that we have delete streaming service, it's supposed to be taken in a string. Right? It's going to be a string from the start. But we could pass in, right? But notice, I could do that, Chase. But it says that it takes the name of a streaming service as an argument if it's in the list and then removes it. Right? So I don't want to pass in the object.getName or anything crazy like that because it should be just the title itself, the name of that streaming service. Then we go for streaming service in self._ streaming services list. It's going to loop through.
Your issue's on line 64, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to remove.
So
I think I know exactly where you're getting at. We have to. It's not streaming service name. It's streaming service, right here. I was trying to say remove the object, but I was passing in the name of the object, not the object itself. So let's try that out. And there we go. It's working. I feel like both you and I-Tim saw it right at the same time. But yeah, I think that's what the issue was. That when I went to go use the dot remove, I was passing in the streaming service name, which was incorrect, right? Because it's a list of objects, not a list of strings. I want to call the object I'm trying to remove. And now it works successfully. All right. That takes care of the delete a streaming service. Let's go on to the last method, which is defining a method named where to watch movie. Where to watch movie. And it takes in. I'm sorry?
sorry, I was going to say I'm really curious how to do this because I'm completely lost.
All right, let's see it. Okay, so we want to see where to watch a movie, and it takes a movie title as an argument and returns a list. So movie title, and I can assume here because it's just a movie title, not an object, it should be a string. So it takes a movie title as an argument and returns a list, right? And I can kind of already infer that it's probably looking for a list of all the streaming services where I can watch this movie from. So let's look at it. Element 0 of the list is a string that is the concatenation of the name and year of the movie with the year in parentheses. So I'm going to do some formatting with the rest of the list being the names of streaming services showing that movie. All right, so I can do something like this, where right off the bat, I can format element 0, right? Because I'm going to do some formatting anyways, and that's going to be the first item within my list. So I can say formatted movie, it's equal to, and it's supposed to be a string. I'll use an F string. And this needs to be the movie title. And the year of the movie. Now, I'm going to keep this empty here for a bit because I don't know the year of the movie. I don't even know if this movie exists. So we'll put a pause on this. But at some point, I do need to be able to format element 0, which is supposed to be a string that is the concatenation of the year and the name of that movie with the year in parentheses. Right? So this should look something very similar to this, where it's like movie title, colon, parentheses, and the year should go here. It would look something like 1990 or something like this, right? But I'll keep it empty for now. I know that there's something supposed to go in here, some kind of variable, which is supposed to be the year. But I don't have access to it yet. I have to make sure that there is some kind of service that has my movie, right? So just keep that in mind. Well, I have the movie title. Now let's go ahead and look through all our services to see what service has our movie. So I'm going to want to loop through all the services. And let's kind of do some pseudocode here. Loop through the service list to access all services. So I'll say for service in self._streaming services list, which will start that for loop. And then once I grab every service, I want to check if the movie exists within this service, right? So I'm going to be grabbing Hula, Disney, Netflix, and as I grab all these services, I'm going to check if the movie exists, right? Now, do we have a method for that? We have add movie, delete movie. We have get catalog and get name. We can probably utilize the catalog method to grab all the movies that this streaming service has, and then check if the movie's in there. So hard coding this line by line, I would say all movies is equal to service.get catalog. Right? Now, I don't necessarily have to do it like this. There's a much better way of doing this. But just to visualize what's actually happening is I'm grabbing that dictionary of all the movies that currently exist within that streaming service, right? Which we see here is a dictionary of key value pairs, with the key being the movie title and the value being the movie object. So now that I have that dictionary, I'm going to use this movie title to see if it exists within all the movies of each specific service. So we can say if all movies dot get, and I'm gonna pass in the movie title as the first argument because I know that the structure of my catalog is the key being the movie title itself. So I should be able to access it to see if it's in here. And if it's not in there, then it should return to me 0 or does not exist. Something like that, right? So we can say if all movies.get movie title is equal to 0, return none. That means it does not exist, right? Because that's exactly what this method is asking from us. Where we see here, if the movie is not available on any of the streaming services, the method should return none. Maybe that's not a good idea yet. Maybe we should loop through everything and then return none if none of these find it. So maybe not do this yet. This might have to be after the for loop if it doesn't encounter it. Right? If it doesn't encounter it. So if it doesn't find it, we can just go ahead and do continue. Right? Because when we do here, if the movie title is in the all movies, if it's equal to 0, that means it's not in here. Then I just want to continue. I have no reason to continue being in this for loop for this specific service. If I have it, then I should probably save this streaming service somewhere so I know what streaming services I've encountered so far that have this movie. So we can say available services with movie. I know it's a little long of a name, but I just want to make sure we understand what we have here. And if we encounter this movie within this very specific service, I want to make sure that I'm tracking this service I found it in. So I'll say available services movie dot append service. So let's actually remove this return none, because I don't want to return none the moment I'm done. I should probably return none if I don't find any services with the movie, right? So from the top, once again, what are we doing here? Well, I have a list here that I'm going to use to track all the services I've encountered the movie to be a part of. It's an empty list, but this is where I'm going to be doing that format. I'm going to loop through all the streaming services. I'm going to grab their catalog. I'm going to check if the movie exists in the catalog. If it doesn't exist, I'm just going to go ahead and continue. Right? But if it does exist, I want to grab that service and save it somewhere so I know that I've encountered it at least once. once I've looked through all the services, I need to see whether I've encountered the movie at least once within the service guide. So I can say if available services movie is greater than 0, then we can do something. If it's not greater than 0, that means I didn't encounter the movie at all, then I should return none. Right? But if it is greater than 0, that means there's some service out there that has my movie. Right? So I should probably do something like return a list that has element 0 of the list is a string that is the concatenation of the name and year of the movie with the year in parentheses, with the rest of the list being the names of the streaming services showing that movie. Right? So far, so good?
No, mine's not working at all. I am kind of irritated.
Well, hold on, we're not there yet. Let's go ahead and see. Well, if we found the movie, we also need to be sure that we're tracking the year when this movie was saved. Right? Or when it was made. We can say year of movie is equal to 0. And we can say something like if year of movie is equal to 0, then I want to change the year of movie to the year of the movie that I encountered. Get movie title get year. All right. Are you guys still with me, or are we lost here?
I'm just going to go back through it. I feel like I was cool up until we got to the where to watch movie, and now it's just I'm just gonna need to go through it.
It's okay. I'll do some refactoring if we can. Yes, Chase?
Yeah, I was gonna say like I'm understanding what you're doing. I think if you had asked me to do all this, I could have stumbled through it, but the way you're explaining it is making sense on how you're kind of going up through the tiers, trying to get that specific title and year.
Yeah, I'll definitely break it apart in a much easier method in a little bit. Let's try to get something on our screen. So if I encountered a service that has the movie, well, I want to add that service into my list of services that I've encountered it. And then at some point, I also want to make sure I'm tracking the year so I can do the formatting for element 0, right? Now, once I've checked all my services and I'm ready to format my results, I'm going to want to add my formatted string somewhere, right? Let's go ahead and move this down here, because this is really where it matters. And this has to be year of movie. And then I need to add this to the beginning of my available services with movie. So I'll say available services movie dot insert object before index. So they should be at index 0. I want to insert formatted movie. I think I can do that. Pretty sure enter is one of the methods. Could we have a pen? Yeah, enter works. Okay. And then let's return available services. I think we got this working. Let's give it a try and figure out what's going on. Let's go ahead and copy this and see how this works. And then do some debugging. And this probably has to be a print statement here. Not supported between instances of a list and ints. Okay. There's an issue here with how I'm checking if the length, my bad. If the length of my available services movie is greater than 0. Hey, there we go. Okay. Let's see. Let me just double check. We found Little Woman, and it found it in one service. Let me actually format the services so we don't get that weird issue here. Let's go with define, represent, self, return, self dot underscore name. There we go. Okay, it's in Disney. All right, let's see where it was added. So this movie is called Little Woman. Little Woman is movie 3. Movie 3 was only added to one streaming service, which is the streaming service 3. But which is the streaming service 3? Disney. It was correct. It got Little Woman. Now let's find one that's repetitive. I see movie 1 was added to streaming service 3 and streaming service 2. Movie 1 is the 7th seal. So let's change it to the 7th seal to see how this works. And did I mistype something? The 7th seal. No, everything's correct. But it only found it in.
Did you by chance delete it from one of those? So I do see a dot delete movie, the 7th seal.
You're absolutely correct. Okay, let's do. I think movie 2 gets added here. And gets added here. Yeah, we can do this movie 2, which is Home Alone. Let's do Home Alone. Thank you for that pointing it out. Home Alone. Which gives me Netflix. But I know it's added into streaming service 1, which is Netflix. And then streaming service 2, which is Hula. So this should return to me 2 of them.
No, you delete Hula on line 118.
Oh my lord. Okay, let's do something. Let's add. Let's remove Hula or delete from the Hula. There we go. Okay, this comment went out. Okay, so my method is working, right? It's gonna grab every single one of them. Element 0 is exactly how it told us that it wanted to be. Element 0 of the list is a string that is the concatenation of the name and year of the movie with the year in parentheses. And we kind of see that here, right? It's no colon, but I added colon on mine by whatever. It's okay, no biggie. It's still doing what it should be doing. But it's working. Let's look at the code one more time. So a couple of things happen here. One, I created a list where all my services with the movie are saved. Right. So whenever I encountered a service that had this movie, it was added to the available services with movie. I created a variable where I'm going to save the year of the movie when I do encounter it. Because when I first start this, I don't know if the movie even exists in any of my services. So I need to make sure that when I do encounter it, I update the year of the movie to its respective year. Right? I then start a loop through all my services within my my streaming services list. I grab the catalog from each service and I temporarily save it into this variable called all movies. I then use a get method for that catalog to see if the movie exists within this catalog. And if it doesn't, then I want to continue, right? Because if it doesn't exist within this this service, then there's no reason to continue staying on here. I need to move on to the next service, right? So I'll just put continue. But if I do encounter it, then I need to add that service into the list that I'm using to track all the services that has this movie. And I also want to make sure that I update my year to the year that it was published, right? Because I encountered it at least once at this point. So I should update my year movie. So I'm tracking how to format element 0. And once I'm done looping through all the services, at this point, I already have the year of the movie. And I've looked through every single service to see if it existed. And it's all saved within my available services with movie list. That's all happening between line 73 and 84. Right? I have now looked for it. I found it everywhere I could find it. Now it's time to actually format the result and figure out what I'm going to respond with. Well, in the event that my available services with movie list is not greater than 0, that means I didn't find it anywhere, then I need to return none. But if it is greater than 0, that means I've encountered it at least once. Therefore, I should return a list which has the formatted movie string at element 0 added into the already created list of all the services I've encountered the movie in. Finally, returning that list. Does everyone understand what I did to achieve this result? I see head nods from Tim and Chase, but Jason, I see the
Yeah,
smile.
I might work on refactoring it at some point. It just maybe it's just the really long variables are throwing me for a loop or something. I don't know.
Maybe I know they're a little bit long, but they're long on purpose so I can give them a very descriptive name in case you got confused of what was what. Is there anything here that you might feel like I'm kind of just lost right here at this part where I just don't know what is happening here?
I mean, it's just gonna take me a little time to kind of just look over it, but I think for the most part, I understand. I'm just gonna need to review it later as well.
Okay. All right. Well, that should conclude the streaming service guide. Tim, what was your issue? Were you able to figure it out?
Yeah, I figured it out. I was that for it. My variable names were not super descriptive, so I was mixing two of them up, and that was enough to screw it all up.
That's okay. Yeah, naming convention is very important. Sometimes even though it might not look the prettiest, if it helps you when you first start off to kind of visualize exactly what is in what, then that's honestly a better way of going about it than to add very vague names or names without actual meaning. But okay, that's going to conclude this assignment. Time is 7:49. We're going to take a 10-minute break, our last break of the night, and we're going to come back. We're going to start the next lesson, which is going to be the, I believe it's going to be importing modules, exception handling, and unit testing. Do I have any questions before we go on break? All right, I'll see you guys here at 7:59. We're going to go ahead and talk about the lesson 9, importing modules, exception handling, and unit testing. The importing modules might seem a little like I already know this because I showed you ahead of time. Mainly because I tend to kind of go on a tangent sometimes, and I end up explaining more than I should at the moment. But I do that just because I would hate for you guys to be confused. Like, Roger, thanks for doing the rest, but like I'm confused at what you did here on this line. Like, where are you getting this from? So I know we already talked about modules and importing a little bit, but we're going to talk a little bit more about them. So what is a module, right? So a module is just a normal Python file that contains definitions of functions or classes that you would like to use in another file. And you kind of already saw that with, I believe it was the math module that we were importing. I was able to right click it and choose the go to definition part of the toolbar that it opened up for us. And it took us to some like random file somewhere, and it had like 100, like 200 lines of code with a bunch of different methods, right? Essentially, someone was smart enough, and they created some kind of file that other people who have Python are able to leverage and take advantage of. Now there are some normal built-in methods like this or modules that come with Python, but you guys can create your very own modules as well, right? And modules, like as you see here, it's just a fancy word for some kind of Python file that you import, right? So instead of defining all your functions and classes and methods into one very specific file where everything is cluttered, you're able to isolate your code somewhere and then import functions as needed whenever the situation arises, right? You can either import the entire file as we've done before when we did import math, or you can import very specific functions from a file so you don't import all the other stuff that you don't need. Here we have a very small example. We create a file called mystats.py, which in essence is the example here. This is the module that they are creating. And this module, they have a function that they coded themselves called the find mean that takes in one argument, which is li, which stands for list. They get a sum of zero, set a sum, they set it to zero. They then loop through the argument that's being passed into this function, and as they go through every single number in this list, they're adding it to the sum variable, and finally returning the average or the mean from this list, right? So when you use stuff like random or randint or math something, whatever kind of module that you're importing for some fancy function, it's not just magic, right? There is stuff that's happening underneath the hood that was either hard coded by somebody else, right? And you're just leveraging something that it's already built. What's the point of reinventing the wheel if someone already has it for you, right? It's like if you were creating a car and you decide to create your own customized wheel from scratch. Why do that when you can just order, some tires from a tire shop, right? Uh, it's a little redundant to just go ahead and try to reinvent a whole new tire when there's perfectly good tires out there that can give you the same results, right? That's kind of the same concept here. The second picture here at the very bottom is the actual main.py, which is like their main file that they're working with. They're importing the entire file of my stats, right? Notice that you don't need the .py here. You just need to know the name of the module. Now, if this is a customized file that you are creating, you need to specify where this file is located at, right? Because both of these files are in the same directory, in the same folder, right? They're essentially on the same level. They're not specifying a file path here, but if this was like nested within like 3 other folders, you would have to specify the directory to get to this file to then use it. So something to keep in mind. And then in this main.py, they use the function that comes from this module, mystats, to use it in the main.py. Right? So they didn't have to declare anything in their main.py. They just use a different file that already has the definitions for all their functions, and then they import it and they can use them as such. Therefore, isolating the code somewhere else and just importing as needed without the clutter of having everything into one single file. Do I have any questions so far on what is a module? All right. Import specific function or multiple, right? So we saw on the previous slide importing the entire module itself. And then we saw something very similar to this, like when I went over the math module. You can import specifically a function and leave the rest, untouched. Here in the snippet on top, they say from my stats, right? So from the whatever module you're trying to import from, I want to import find me. And then they're able to use it just the same. Notice that they no longer need the prefix of my stats, right? Because they're not importing the module my stats. They're importing find mean from my stats, right? So they don't necessarily have access to the module my stats. They only have access to find mean. So therefore, they only need to call the find mean method because it's the only thing they have accessibility to. Whereas here, they're importing the entirety of the module. Therefore, they have to call the module itself and then specify what function within the module they want to use. So the way that you import it is going to dictate the way that you use it. You can also chain multiple different functions within the same module, right? If this module had 100 different functions, but you needed more than just one, it doesn't mean that you have to either import one or the other, right? Either one function or all the functions. You can chain them using the commas, right? Do I have any questions on how to import a module or specific functions or multiple from a module? All right, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Import issues. So here, we have our main.py. Notice that our main.py has nothing except one line. And this one line is the module calc, import calc, right? Well, let's look at the actual calc.py. The calc.py file, it has the declaration of two different functions. We have molt and add. And then within the same file, the module, they're doing some other code. They create a variable called result, and then they utilize the function declare within this module, and then in this module, they're printing out results, right? Well, let's look at the main.py. What happens when they imported calc? Something happened in their console. It printed out 15, even though in the main file, the only thing they have is them importing the module. They have nothing else. Well, that's because when they import the entire file, it ran through from top to bottom every single line of the calc file, including the declaration of the result variable and the print statement. So even though they didn't do that in their main.py, because that's what your calc.py is running, it's going to do the same thing. Right? It's going to run the entire module, and that's something to take into consideration. So this is some kind of import issue that you might encounter, and we'll talk about how to fix this. And that's by using the main function. And I'm sure if you've ever seen some kind of Python tutorial, you've probably encountered something very similar to this. Right? If the file is imported, the underscore name will equal the name of the module and the file won't be executed. What does that mean? Well, here we have our two functions, molt and add. This is still within the calc.py file. And then we have here a function called main, right? This main function now holds the declaration of the result variable and the print statement. And then we add some functionality here where we say if name is equal to main, then run main. They're running the main function here. They're calling it. Right? What do you think that's going to do? Well, let's check it out in real time. And this is a little confusing. I'm not going to lie to you guys. So it's better to see it in real time. Let's go ahead and close the README. And then let's go into lesson 11. I'm sorry, not lesson 11, lesson 9. We are now in lesson 9. So cd lesson underscore 09. And then I want you to make a new directory and just call this whatever you want. I'll call it lesson underscore 09 dot py. Oh, I didn't mean to make a directory. I meant to make a file. Let me just delete this. Touch lesson underscore 09 dot py. There we go. Whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. Just somewhere that we can code along. All right. So here, this is going to be my main file. As a matter of fact, you can probably call it main.py. I also want you to make another directory and call this module underscore example.py. And this is going to be like our so-called module where we can add some functionality. I'm going to make a simple function called add that's going to take an x and a y, and then it returns x plus y. Nothing crazy, right? And then I want to do print hello just for the sake of it, right? Well, here I'm going to say import within my main file, import module x. And now let's run our main file, which is in this example, lesson 9. Python lesson underscore 9. What we saw here is that when I imported the module, right, the moment I ran this file, it's printing out hello, right? Because when I import the entire module, it's going to go and read everything from top to bottom of what's happening here. And on line 5, we're printing out hello. And there's an issue here, right? And the way they solved it was by using the main function, right? Let's see. Let's go ahead and print out underscore name. I think this will work. If I print within the main file, I print underscore name. What does underscore name give me? When I print underscore name underscore, it's a dunder method, right? When I print out this dunder method name, it prints out this right here, which is main, right? What does that tell you? I know it's very confusing, right? So what name is referring to is the file that's calling it, right? This file here, lesson 09, I am printing within this file what my name is. Who am I, right? The file is saying, who am I? What is my name? My name is main, right? My name is main. And I want you to keep that in mind. When a file prints out its own name, it's going to print out main. I wonder if I could do underscore main. No, I won't. Okay. Right? We see here that it didn't work. I wonder if I can import module X. I could. Okay. All right. But when this specific file prints out its own name, it calls itself by main. I am the main file. That's what it's saying. I am the main file. Well, when you do something like if underscore name is equal to underscore main, what you are saying, if I am the main file that's running the code, then I want to do hello. And now, when I run lesson 09 again, notice that the hello function didn't run. Well, why is that? Well, because when it runs the module X, the module X is not the main file that's running. The main file that is currently running right now is lesson 09. That's what I'm running. Python lesson 09. So what that says to your code when it tries to import this module and it gets to line 5, it says, hey, if the name of the file that's running this file is called main, then I want to print hello. If not, then don't print hello. So this tells it is, are you running this file independently or are you running it as an import module? Right? Am I being run independently as a script or am I being imported somewhere and being ran by somebody else? If the person running this file is myself, me, then I want to print hello. And notice that when I believe I print out, if I do Python module dot underscore X, .py. It should work. Yeah, there you go. Right, when I run this module, it actually prints hello this time because it's checking who is running this file. Am I being ran by myself, or is another file calling me and running me instead? Does this make sense so far?
It makes sense, but when would you utilize that?
It would be utilized if you, for example, let's say you create a Python script, and we have one specifically for our YouTube channel. I don't use it. The immersive program uses it. But what happens is Francisco, whenever he's done teaching, he opens up this Python script and he runs it. This Python script manipulates the YouTube channel for Platoon. It accesses his directory on his own computer. It looks for the most recent video that was downloaded from Zoom. It sets a caption, right? There's some kind of template he has, and then it automatically uploads the file onto YouTube, right? The file should run all this code when ran independently. But if somewhere else I want to use some kind of functionality that the script has, but I don't want to run it at all, there's a function in there that I want to use, I can import his script and use a specific function, but not actually run the entirety of the code. So it's very situational, but it's helpful when you're trying to run Python files, depending what the situation is for, right? Whether you're trying to achieve a certain task, if you're trying to run it individually, or for example, like if you create a file like that math file, that not only does it do some kind of complex math, but it also allows you to import it somewhere else and take leverage of the functions declared in there. That's when you would declare like, hey, do I want this function to run all the code, or should it just give you access to some functions depending on who is running the file? Does that make sense to you, Tim?
Yeah, just very situational.
Yeah, it is very situational, right? Whether you want everything to run or not, or if you're just using this file for a specific function or something that exists within here, right? You don't necessarily want it to run everything, all 100, 200 lines of code. All you want it to run is a specific section. Make sense? Awesome. For example, let's say I have this file here, my module file to find how much I saved through the year, right? Maybe something very complex, right? And then you have a bunch of different formulas like finding my income. You have another formula that's like find income after taxes, right? You know, you maybe have a formula that does other mumbo jumbo. And then at the end, you have a main function that does the whole legwork for finding how much I saved through the year, utilizing all the different functions you had prior, right? This is what the main reason for this script is. But then later on, you have a need for a function that you've already declared somewhere else. Like, oh, maybe I could just leverage it instead of hard coding this. You can just import this file and grab the function you're using instead of running all the other code that's within here, right? The original purpose was probably to do something else, but you already have a bunch of complex functions that you probably already defined and took time to create, which you can use. Does that make sense? Or did I just confuse you more? Right? Like you can have a script do something, but you can also leverage those same functions and use them somewhere else without having to run the actual script itself. All right, moving forward. So if the file is imported, underscore name will equal the name of the module in the file and won't be executed. If the file is run as a script, right, individually, then name will equal main, so the script will run, right? So the file is run as a script or on its own in a sense, right? But if it's being imported, it won't run it because it's not the actual main file running the module. It's something else that's imported. Make sense? So now you know what this means and why people do it. All right, basic stats.py is probably going to be the only problem we can work on today. Basic stats.py. All right, in lesson 9. For this project, you will import the statistics module. You're going to write a class called student that has 2 private data members, the student's name and grade. It should have an init method that takes 2 values and uses them to initialize the data members. And it should have a method called getGrade. Right? So a whole class that can create a student object that has a name and grade for students. Right? And we've seen an example of that here. We have students, Kayomi 73, student Mercedes 74, student Avonica 78, so on and so forth. That's the class itself. But then you have to write a separate function, not part of the student class, right? A function, not a method, called basic stats that takes as a parameter a list of student objects and returns a tuple containing the mean, median, and mode of all the grades. To do this, use the mean, median, and mode functions and the statistics module. And you also have a link here that takes you to Python documents if you want to get to more information. Your basic stats function should return those 3 values as a tuple in the exact order given above: mean, median, and mode. Right? So it should look like this. You're able to create 4 different students, add them to a list, and then use that function with the list of different objects to find the mean, median, and mode of all those students utilizing the statistics module. Time is 7:23. Let's go ahead and come back at 7:38. I'll see you guys in a bit. All right, we're about to start quick back. Tim, I'm assuming you were able to complete the assignment.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, you want to be our example for tonight.
All right, see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I started out just importing the median, mean, and mode from the statistics module. And then I defined a class, student, initialized it using the self property name and grade, made them private, defined a function, or I'm sorry, defined a method get grade, return self, get name, which wasn't required, but I thought we might use it anyway, and did that. Defined a separate function here called basic stats that was fed a list, and I told it make sure it's a list. Created a variable as an empty list to store the grades, and an empty tuple, which I realized later I don't actually need to do because tuples can't be modified, but I just overwrote it later anyway, so it doesn't matter. And did a looping through each student within the student list that was provided and appending the grade values to the grade list that I defined earlier. Test to see if that worked using a print statement, and then just created new variables for the mean value, median value, and a mode value using the functions that I imported from the statistics. Took my answer tuple, what's the word? Reinitialized it using those values given in the order that was required, and then return the answer.
Right on. Okay. Good stuff. Pretty straightforward. I know, like, the importing stuff isn't completely new. It's still part of the curriculum, so I wanted to make sure we at least gave it a try. Um, we are going to stop here. The next part of the lesson after importing modules is exception handling, and then unit testing, which has its own exercises to work on. And I don't want to get something without enough time to finish it. So we'll stop here for tonight. Does anybody have any questions on anything that was covered today? I know the large majority of today's class was working on the streaming guide. We took like an hour to work on it, and then I saw the time. It took us like an hour to talk through it. So I want to make sure like if everyone's still good with everything that we've covered so far, working with object-oriented programming. Okay. All right. No questions. That's good. I will stay here a little bit longer if anybody has any other questions that they want to talk to one-on-one. If not, you guys have a good rest of your night. Thank you guys.
Thanks.